It's a pleasure to be here to talk about our Conservative government's commitment to deepening our trade relationships in priority markets around the world, and particularly in high-growth Asian countries. And I'm especially pleased to be speaking to the Vancouver Board of Trade. Over the years, I've had the privilege of interacting with many of you, and I want to assure you that your input is invaluable as I do my work as Canada's Minister of Trade. Now, let me start off by stating that the United States is and will continue to be our most important trading partner, our largest trading partner, and I want to assure all of you that our government remains focused on deepening that relationship and on removing the many barriers to trade that still remain in what is by far the most successful trade relationship in the world. And that's why we're working very hard to finalize an agreement on the border vision and the regulatory cooperation initiatives that were announced last February by President Obama as well as Prime Minister Harper. At the same time, many of your businesses are also at the forefront of Canada's ever-growing ties to Asia. Whether it's in China, Japan, South Korea, or the Southeast Asian family of nations, Canada's future financial security will depend on businesses like yours to create new sources of jobs and prosperity through increased trade and investment with this dynamic region of the world. And let me say, I've been to that region. I visited it last month. I went to Japan, Indonesia, and China to deepen Canada's trade and investment ties, and I was impressed by the scope of Canada's commercial engagement in those countries. But let me say, there's still so much more that can and will be done under our government. For example, in Indonesia, I was able to sign a declaration that represents a commitment by Canada and the Association of Southeast Nations to explore new ways to deepen our economic ties. Already, these 10 countries, the ASEAN countries, collectively rank as Canada's 7th largest trading partner. Southeast Asia is a region of significant and growing economic importance to Canada and is a priority market under our government's global commerce strategy. It's a market of approximately 600 million consumers, a growing middle class, and abundant natural resources. And while I was there, I had the honor of attending the grand opening of Manulife's new office in Jakarta. Last year, Manulife was named Indonesia's best life insurance company, another Canadian success story. In Japan, I represented Canada in signing the historic anti-counterfeiting trade agreement, which will combat trade in counterfeit and pirated goods. Protecting our businesses against piracy and counterfeiting is crucial in a world where prosperity is so closely linked to high-quality science, research, and innovation. And I also announced at the same time an expanded air transport agreement between Canada and Japan, which will help deepen Canada's important trade and investment relationship there, while benefiting air travelers, workers, and businesses. Having sat at the table here with Larry Berg from YVR, he makes it very clear every time I meet him how important it is to expand our air transport agreements, and I can assure you, Larry, we're working very hard on that. And in what was perhaps the most rewarding part of my visit to Japan, I had the opportunity to pay my respects to the people of Japan and visit the Sendai region, where Viceroy Homes of Ontario is helping to build replacement homes in areas affected by the recent devastating earthquake and tsunami. Now, last week, I concluded my first trade mission to China, which had me visiting 6 cities in 7 days. And I can assure you, the visit was highly productive, as I met with my counterpart, as well as numerous other government officials and Canadian businesses which are active on the ground in China. And it reinforced my view that even closer trade and investment ties between Canada and China will be of enormous benefit to both of our countries. In addition to advancing Canada's policy interests in the capital of Beijing, we also advanced our commercial and trade interests in China's financial capital, Shanghai, and in 4 of the country's most dynamic regional centers, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Suzhou, and Qingdao. My trade visit focused on 7 critical sectors where Canadian companies have demonstrated their capabilities and expertise as producers of world-class goods and services. And those sectors were aerospace, financial services, clean and ethical energy, advanced manufacturing, education, agri-food, and of course, natural resources. The success of Canadian businesses on the ground in China is helping China's economy to continue to grow while providing its growing middle class with goods and services it needs. But it's not all about China. The success of Canadian companies in China also translates into jobs, prosperity, and future opportunities right here at home. We know the opportunities for Canadian businesses in China and other Asian markets are abundant and often highly rewarding. And that's why our government is committed to helping Canadian businesses achieve their maximum potential in this key market. One of the ways we're doing this is by ensuring Canada's Asia-Pacific Gateway continues to provide Canada with a clear competitive advantage. Thanks to our government's strategic infrastructure investments and partnerships with the provinces, with municipalities, and the private sector, Canada now has a world-class transportation network that is providing an efficient, reliable, and cost-effective connection between Asian and North American markets. These investments are positioning our country as the gateway of choice between Asia and North America. In fact, Canada's West Coast ports are more than 2 days closer to Asian markets than other ports on the West Coast of North America. And these advantages are already paying off. Over the last 5 years, Canada's market share of North American West Coast container traffic increased by 30%. In 1 year alone, from 2009 to 2010, using Asia-Pacific Gateway infrastructure, Canadian exports to China increased by almost 19%, reaching $13.2 billion. And recently, Wood Resource Quarterly, a U.S. industry publication, forecast that Canadian lumber exports to China are on track to reach a record $1.2 billion in 2011. British Columbia's annual wood exports to China have also soared in value. Sales more than tripled from $179 million in 2008 to reach $669 million in 2010. As a consequence, a number of sawmills in BC, including operations in Quesnel and Vavenby and Mackenzie, have reopened and retooled to help meet the growing Chinese demand for BC wood products. In the process, they're protecting and, of course, creating new jobs for Canadians. Now, as many of you know, the competitive advantages enjoyed by our West Coast ports have been noted by some in Washington, D.C. The U.S. Federal Maritime Commission is presently undertaking a study to look at how to make U.S. ports more competitive, complaining that they're losing business to Canadian ports. Some have even suggested that one possible remedy is to impose new taxes and duties on goods entering the United States from Canadian ports. And as you may have noticed from some of the media reports, we are actively engaged in opposing those efforts. Now, thankfully, we understand that this idea is not shared by the Obama administration. We welcome Ambassador Jacobson's recent assurances that no new taxes are contemplated on cargo that enters the United States from Canada. However, on this point, I want to make it abundantly clear that as Canada's Trade Minister, I will continue to defend Canadian interests and promote our competitive advantages every chance I get. And I should add that at every opportunity, I will highlight that it was our government that chose to invest heavily in critical port-related transportation infrastructure, and it was our government that chose not to impose harbor taxes. These advantages and our commitment to strengthening our trade and investment ties in China are not by accident. They are by design, and the results speak for themselves. And I want to add, there's been some discussion about the level playing field, that somehow Canada isn't playing fair. I can assure you, Canada plays fair, but we play aggressively, and we play to win. That's competition, and that's how we will continue to do business. Now, getting back to China. China is now Canada's second largest trading partner. We've seen a tripling of our exports to China over the last decade. So we're close to some $60 billion a year in bilateral trade. In fact, a recent survey showed that a large number of Canadian businesses are looking to expand into China over the next 5 years. Our government is committed to building on this record. In the years ahead, we believe the Chinese economy can and will benefit greatly from Canadian innovation and expertise. China is home to an expanding middle class and consumer base, and it has a burgeoning science, technology, and innovation sector that needs our expertise, all of which reinforces the fact that China holds enormous potential for deeper economic relations and greater prosperity for Canadians. But more importantly, it reinforces the fact that international trade and commerce are key drivers of stability, prosperity, and improved political and social conditions around the world. It's a truth that is broadly recognized and vigorously advanced every day by our government. The government of China certainly understands this. They understand trade, they understand investment, and they understand that true success only comes from having a long-term view and vision of the optimal economic outcomes. So, having just returned from China, where I met with a number of key figures in the Chinese leadership, I can tell you that they very much are in it for the long haul. Those of you who have visited China, you know how they do business and how they plan. It's long-term planning. And that's a novel approach, especially here in our Western world. Now think about it. Here in the West, trends, fashion, and popular culture are typically measured by the season. Corporate performance is measured by the quarter or by the close and share prices every day. And the news cycle is measured, of course, by the minute. However, when it comes to the question of how Canada should view its growing relationship with China, a long-term strategy is well worth considering, and I would suggest critical. We know that through constructive engagement with China, we can promote Canadian values. Through closer economic ties, increased prosperity and opportunity, we will benefit the citizens of both of our countries. And let me add this. Our Conservative government continues to respectfully promote the prevailing Canadian values of democracy, freedom, human rights, and the rule of law. We also value individual and corporate enterprise, innovation, and free trade. And we also know that with economic progress comes political and social advancement. And on this fundamental matter, we have clearly seen that deepening our trade ties around the world is a win-win for Canada and its trading partners. Let me explain. Canadians benefit from the good jobs, deepened prosperity, and consumer benefits that come from increased trade. Now, in turn, our international partners, many of which represent developing economies, share in the benefits of an ever-expanding middle class and an improved standard of living that is lifting more of the world's population out of poverty every day. At the same time, we're able to share with those of our trading partners which are emerging from troubled histories our best practices on creating better social conditions, improved governance, and greater respect for human rights and the rule of law. Canada's trade relationships in South America are proof of this. Take Chile, for example. You may not know this, but Canada and Chile finalized a free trade agreement back in 1997, Chile's first comprehensive bilateral trade agreement. We were at the forefront. Since then, our bilateral merchandise trade has more than tripled, reaching almost $2.5 billion in 2010. According to Statistics Canada, Canadian direct investment in Chile has quadrupled since the trade agreement came into effect, reaching over $13 billion in 2010. Now, since concluding a trade agreement with Canada, Chile has signed more free trade agreements than any other country in South America. To date, it has signed 21 trade agreements with 58 countries, representing more than 90% of Chile's total annual trade, making it one of the most open and liberalized trading nations on the planet. In late 2009, Chile became the first South American country to join the OECD. The World Bank has described Chile's financial system as large and well-diversified compared with other countries in the region. It is respected for its solid regulatory and supervisory framework, as well as for its capacity for recovery in the event of crises. Chile attributes its remarkable surge in trade to these free trade agreements. Its integration into the world economy has allowed Chile to leverage its overall economic development. And according to the World Bank, between 1999 and 2009, per capita income in Chile has doubled, and the overall standard of living has improved dramatically. Now, what's even more important is that today Chile is an international leader in protecting and advancing human rights. Colombia is another example of how deeper economic ties lead to social progress. As Canada negotiated a trade agreement with Colombia, improvements to governance, living conditions, and human rights moved in tandem. Colombia's current government has taken steps toward the establishment of a common human rights agenda. It's issued statements on the legitimacy of the work of human rights defenders. It's committed to strengthening labor rights, and it's passed anti-corruption laws. And Colombia's ambitious victims and land restitution law, which came into force this past June, is a commitment to provide compensation to victims from past political conflicts. And finally, in Honduras, a country I recently visited, along with Colombia, we see that they are seeking to escape a troubled past. Canada has recently completed negotiations on a free trade agreement which provides an opportunity for that country to lift its citizens out of poverty. At the same time, our engagement seeks to draw Honduras into the family of nations which respects basic human rights and fundamental principles of democracy. Now, friends, every step of the way, the causal link between deeper trade, greater prosperity, and improved political and social outcomes is undeniable. The win-win benefits of trade for our country as well as for our trading partners is the overarching principle behind our conservative government's whole approach to trade with our partners around the world. Sadly, there are still those among us who fearmonger and misrepresent the facts. And I'm going to be quite frank here. That group does include the NDP. These are the same parties and special interest groups that opposed the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement and the North American Free Trade Agreement. Indeed, these are the same shrill voices that have opposed each and every free trade agreement that Canada has ever signed. Remember, we were going to lose millions of jobs under the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement. Our economy was going to be hollowed out. Canada would lose its cultural identity, and we'd be selling out our sovereignty over things such as our abundant fresh water supplies. Recall that? In short, the sky was going to fall. Or so they promised. Of course, none of that happened. The sun still shines upon Canada, only much brighter. Indeed, free trade has created hundreds of thousands of new jobs. Trade with the U.S. has tripled, and trade with Mexico has quadrupled. Our vibrant Canadian culture remains secure, and the last time I checked, Canada still had full control over its water resources. Friends, Canadians know that this country's prosperity depends on trade. My job as trade minister is to connect the dots between trade and our long-term prosperity. And Canadians know that international trade accounts for more than 60% of Canada's GDP, and that 1 in 5 Canadian jobs is related to trade. Our international trading partners also know this. As I mentioned, many of our trade agreements are partnerships with emerging economies, countries for which international trade is creating new economic opportunities for people struggling to lift themselves out of poverty. The harmful anti-trade agenda of our opponents would deny these benefits to millions of people. And that agenda would stand in the way of economic development, improved living standards, and the emergence of a functional middle class in many of the world's most deprived regions. Friends, our challenge is to confront those myths, the myths of our opponents. It's the challenge to choose engagement over isolation, the challenge to choose constructive dialogue over unproductive hysteria, and practical economic growth strategies over archaic and long discredited ideology. So in closing, my message to all of you is this: our government wants to partner with you. There's a great adventure out there for all of us to discover, an adventure that offers Vancouver and British Columbia, and indeed all of Canada, a new era of unparalleled opportunities and prosperity. So I look forward to joining you on that great adventure. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Well, Minister, thank you so very much for that, those insightful comments and informative keynote, and thank you for being aggressive. Canada is lucky to have you, and we're so very proud that you're from this region. Thank you for making the right decision about harbor taxes. Thank you about air transportation agreements, and thank you for agreeing to take a few questions. So first, from the Vancouver Board of Trade's International Trade Committee, you have discussed China and Asia here today. Can you please provide an update on the government's broader trade plan and how it will benefit Canadian businesses and workers, if you just speak to that a bit?
Well, let me start off by saying that when the Prime Minister appointed me to be Trade Minister, he also added the portfolio of the Asia-Pacific Gateway because he was making a very clear point that that was going to be one of the primary focuses of the work that I will be doing. We, of course, have a very ambitious trade agenda. As I mentioned in my speech, we've signed free trade agreements with 9 different countries since we were elected in 2006. We are presently negotiating with some 50 other countries, including the EU, of course, which is a bloc of 27 countries. We completed our 9th round recently, and now we're moving into the intense phase. We're moving sector by sector to deal with some of the more intractable challenges in those negotiations. We've also commenced free trade negotiations with India. We've completed 2 rounds. We've scheduled another round coming up very soon. And then, as you know, I visited China recently, and we're in the throes of finalizing a foreign investment protection agreement with that country, which would actually provide a clear set of rules under which Canadians would invest in China and Chinese would invest in Canada. It would also set out a clear set of rules under which dispute resolution would take place. It would essentially take the dispute resolution process out of the domestic context, which would concern some of our Canadian businesses, and places it in the international context. With Japan, we're just completing a joint study to see what a deepened trading relationship could look like. That could lead to free trade negotiations. It could lead to sectoral negotiations. We don't know yet. And so we're being very aggressive in identifying new places, new opportunities for Canadian companies to do business and to invest. Indonesia is another country that we're negotiating a foreign investment protection agreement with. As I mentioned, I was recently in Indonesia. Wow, that's quite a region, 600 million consumers, many of whom are moving into the middle class and are looking for opportunities to do business with us. So I don't know if that answers the question, but you can ask me afterwards if you want more details.
Thank you, Minister. And we have time, unfortunately, for just one more question from the Vancouver Board of Trade's Economic Development Committee. Can you please tell us in more detail how the Asia-Pacific Gateway and Corridor Initiative is helping to increase trade between Canada and Asia?
Well, thank you. This morning I was able to visit with Port Metro Vancouver and acknowledge Duncan Wilson, who's here, and quite a number of other members of your team there. We have long ago identified that improving the infrastructure between Canada and its Asia-Pacific partners is a #1 priority for us. It's why our government has invested somewhere in the order of $1.4 billion in improving our gateway infrastructure. And that's, by the way, been leveraged with provincial, municipal, and also private sector investments Basically, the value of that total investment is somewhere in the order of $4.3 billion, perhaps somewhat higher, and we're continuing to identify new opportunities to make investments like that. We had good discussions this morning about where those investments could be, and it's absolutely critical that we remain focused on providing Canada with an ongoing competitive edge, because we're competing with some aggressive competition from around the world, including the neighbor to the south of us. One of the other things we're doing is, as Minister for the Asia-Pacific Gateway, I'm looking at the Asia-Pacific Gateway not only as an infrastructure strategy. There's so much more that our engagement with the Asian economies should include. For example, are there regulatory reforms that are necessary to allow our investments, to allow our trade to take place on an expedited manner? Are there labor challenges that face us that are going to jeopardize our ability to use our ports efficiently? Is there a branding strategy? Is there a marketing strategy that we should develop that is going to build our cachet in some of those key markets that I addressed earlier? And is it going to involve a higher level of political engagement with some of our key trading partners? And so I'm working on that with a great team back in Ottawa, but I can assure you that when it comes to the Asia-Pacific, I'm committed to engaging on a regular basis. I expect I'll be traveling back and forth between Canada and our Asian partners many, many times until the Prime Minister moves me on to some other position. Of course, he's the boss, and we very much value the leadership that the Prime Minister has shown in identifying those economic opportunities that Canadians have to expand our long-term prosperity.